Greetings and happy Halloween, everyone. As you can tell by the dark, creepy structure in the background with some jack-o'-lanterns near the gate, I'm here to bring you my review of the second live-action Loud House movie, A Really Haunted Loud House. When I first heard that there was going to be a sequel to the Christmas film from 2021 and the live-action TV series, I was not expecting a lot of good things to come out of this movie, and oh boy was I right about that. While there are some things I really liked, which would include giving characters other than Lincoln and Clyde more screen time and more involvement into the overall story, there are things that make this movie very difficult to sit through. Now, before I begin, I just want to take a moment to answer a question I've been asked several times since 2022. Ever since the first episode, people have been wondering if I'm ever going to review the Really Loud House TV series. I'm going to be completely straight with all of you. More than likely, I am not going to be reviewing it. For one thing, the series is uninteresting, very padded out to fill 20 minutes, and a little unfocused with too much emphasis on Lincoln and Clyde. Then we're shown how most of the remaining cast are mostly used as background characters, even though it's not always the case. But the biggest negative would be the level of cringe some of the episodes reach, and that's something I'd rather not have to sit through again. Plus, the thoughts and critiques I have about the show are fundamentally no different from what I said about the Christmas movie and what I'm going to say about the Halloween movie. There are some things that work in a live-action setting, and some things can only work if they're animated. Some of the acting is good, while some could use some improvement, although I will talk about how some actors have stepped up their game since the first movie and the TV series pilot. So yeah, I'm not a huge fan of the Really Loud House, so the chances of me reviewing it are very slim. However, for the sake of Halloween, and me being a fan of Halloween-related media, I figured I might as well talk about the second live-action movie. Even though I mentioned how I wasn't expecting this movie to blow me out of the water, I'll admit I was more intrigued by the trailers for this than I was for anything regarding the TV series. It also doesn't dive too far into cringe levels of bad like the TV series does, although your definition and my definition of the word cringe might not be the same. One last thing, and this is a personal rule of mine. I'm choosing to approach the sequel the same way I approach both the Christmas movie and the TV series. The live-action version of the Loud House exists in its own universe separate from the cartoon. Therefore, it's free to do whatever it wants starting from the beginning of the 5th season of the cartoon series and simply going in its own direction from there. Given what happens in the live-action universe when it comes to characters and story, nitpicking all the obvious differences between the movie and the cartoon is the least of my concerns. So I'm not going to harp on every single trivial thing, like the characters not wearing the same clothes they would normally wear in the animated universe, even though their wardrobes in the Christmas movie were a near identical match to the cartoon. However, there are some things this movie does keep consistent with the cartoon, such as Lincoln, Clyde, and Luann as the only characters to wear the same Halloween costumes they wore in Tricked from season 2. Technically, Luna's skeleton costume appears in this movie, but it's worn by Lynn. For the most part, the personalities and mannerisms of the main characters in the movie are no different from their animated counterparts, so I'm not going to be overly critical of how any of them are presented, although there will be some exceptions to some characters. Anyway, without much further ado, join me as I, SteamTeamRedubUK, CC Trainor-Ling, bring you my review of A Really Haunted Loud House. Before I talk about the negatives, and believe me, there's plenty of those to go around, I'll start off with a few positives since they were the most entertaining, if not the most tolerable parts of the movie. The biggest highlights for me were all the musical scenes with the Louds. There was the song Spooky Night performed by Luna and her family during their Spooktacular, and they also did their own rendition of the classic song I Want Candy just as the movie was finishing up. Lincoln and Clyde were also singing that one Mick Swagger song from the episode For Bros About the Rock at one point, and I certainly can't forget Luna playing her guitar on top of their Halloween-themed van. In addition to the music and the family's interesting choices for Halloween costumes, I really enjoyed the dance choreography during Spooky Night. For a live-action dance number, it was really well done. It had a good balance of great music and spooky visuals. In fact, I would say all the visuals in the sequel were better than the visuals from the Christmas movie, although there really weren't too many Christmassy visuals in that movie to begin with. To be fair, the sequel takes place during Halloween, and usually that means there's more creativity when it comes to setting the right tone for the story. Even so, I consider the more eye-catching visuals as a sign of how far the live-action incarnation has come since the first movie. Then there's the acting from the main cast. I know I already complimented the acting in my review of the first movie, but in my opinion, the acting from the main cast has stepped up since A Loud House Christmas. Not by leaps and bounds, but you can tell many of the cast members, both the originals and the replacements for some of the previous actors who only appeared in the Christmas movie, are more settled in their roles. For example, I had a few criticisms about Ava Carlton's portrayal portrayal of Lenny because her initial performance in the TV series came off as both underwhelming and unconvincing. Even though I believe Lenny's original actress Dora Dolphin nailed her character perfectly the first time, I must admit Ava's performance has gotten a lot better. She and the rest of the cast had been working on the TV series for months prior to this film's production, so maybe all that extra screen time had something to do with it. Speaking of screen time, one noteworthy improvement from the first movie would be how the rest of the Loud family had more of a leading role. Lincoln and Clyde practically dominated the majority of the first movie, while Lincoln's sisters and parents had very little time to be in the spotlight. This time they actually had a lot more to do and weren't simply standing in the background. They collectively had more of a presence and purpose in this movie than at any other point in the live-action universe, and I greatly appreciate that. I can also appreciate how the movie made use of other characters that only ever appeared in the live-action TV series, sometimes only getting 1 or 2 cameos in certain episodes and then disappearing altogether. Some of these characters include Todd the Robot, Flip, and especially Lincoln's usual set of friends, Stella, Liam, Rusty, and Zach. Much like Lincoln's family, the Freckle Gang collectively had more screen time in this movie than at any other point in the TV series, and once again, I greatly appreciate that. They have a little subplot where they plan to catch a monster on Halloween, and they finally get their chance when they supposedly see a werewolf, which is obviously Lynn Sr. going insane on his own terms. More on that part later. They chase Lincoln's dad around town and try to catch him inside the food and fuel, but Lynn Sr. gets away and makes off with all of Flip's candy in the process. They try to capture Flip dressed as a devil and are subsequently reprimanded for their actions inside the store. They later show up at the end of the movie where they're seen taking a selfie with Lincoln's dad. Yeah, I know their subplot was a little silly and perhaps over the top, but you know what? I'm fine with that. Their performances were still entertaining for what they were, and giving the spotlight to other characters instead of constantly defaulting to Clink and McCloud makes things more interesting. One last positive I have, as minor as it might seem, would be how the story doesn't really embrace a lot of fantasy elements as a means of pushing the story forward. There have been instances in the TV series where dark magic and spellcasting has been used, but here I couldn't find a lot of it, if any. The animated series has dabbled with it a few times in recent seasons, but I liked how the movie tried to stay as realistic as possible. Yes, there are moments where it's heavily implied that fantasy elements still very much exist in this universe, but no such elements were at work in this movie. It's like the story tried to be like the Halloween special Tricked, as in it refrained from doing something supernatural and tried to stay in the realm of reality. Lucy could have easily dished out some dark magic during the Halloween Spooktacular and the assault on her house, but she didn't. Even though I think the wackiness during the assault on the Loud House's front lawn got to be a bit too much and far too cartoony for my liking, I'll give the movie a point for not pulling out the convenient magic card like the animated series does from time to time. Not to say using such a card in the cartoon is always a bad thing, but hopefully you get what I'm saying. Now, regarding fantasy and getting back to some of the acting for a moment, there was one character performance that was very, very bizarre. I'm talking about Brian Stepanick's role as Lynn Sr., so now I'm going to slowly transition into talking about the negatives of the movie. I won't say Brian's acting was entirely bad, because his delivery for the character he voices in the animated series was spot on and always has been. My problem is how his character was written. For the most part, acting crazy and freaking himself out is what his character normally does, but it's how the movie presents this particular freakout is what I have a problem with. He cuts himself on one of Lucy's bizarre necklaces, and Lucy initially thinks it's the one composed of the teeth from the mythical beast Romulus. Not sure how she would be able to make something like that happen, but okay. She says her dad will soon turn into a feral beast, but it's quickly revealed her dad actually cut himself on a necklace composed of harmless goblin teeth. Once again, this is the strange necklace she happens to possess because reasons. Naturally, you would think the dad would have nothing to worry about, but you'd be wrong. The dad turns into a complete hypochondriac and really believes he's slowly turning into some kind of wolf creature. He eats Luann's sandwich like a feral beast, fearfully puts on pointed gloves while trying to avoid looking at the full moon outside, and then transforms into a werewolf by carelessly walking into a bucket of liquid glue and falling face first into a furry beanbag chair. He even announces what he just walked and fell into, and yet he's so petrified that he still believes he transformed naturally. Just how does this make any sense? Again, I understand it's in Lynn Sr.'s character to scare himself to the point where he truly thinks his life is in some kind of danger, but this werewolf transformation is beyond stupid because he openly acknowledges what caused him to undergo his so-called transformation. If it was super dark and he couldn't see anything, then maybe him believing he turned into a feral beast would make a little more sense. Either way, he fully embraces cliche werewolf behavior with the typical werewolf-like voice, and he only stops acting that way once his family confronts him after they nearly run him over with their van. No, seriously, that's how his part of the story is wrapped up. It's just, I'm a wolf. No, you're not. Oh, okay then. I'm may have had my complaints when he got blasted with tranquilizer spray in the first movie, but this whole thing with him acting like an out-of-control werewolf, just get the out of here. Kinda funny, yes. Terribly written, bigger yes. But believe me, the negatives when it comes to the characters of this movie don't end here. However, I can't really talk about the other characters without first talking about the main plot. The central storyline is Lincoln wants to impress some popular new kid at school named Xander. I'll talk more about his character later. And he and Clyde manage to score invites to one of his parties, which doesn't go over so well for the two of them once they get there. These two were originally going to go trick-or-treating and partake in the yearly Loud Family Halloween Spooktacular. However, Xander convinces them middle schoolers are too cool for trick-or-treating and dressing up for Halloween, so Clink and McCloud try to be cool themselves by choosing to forego their initial plans and attend Xander's party instead. This was a combination of the central premises to the episode's New Haunts from the Casa Grandes and Deal Me Out from the third season of The Loud House. I don't know if this counts towards anything, but Lincoln choosing to abandon his yearly Halloween tradition could technically be considered a continuation from the lesson he learned at the end of the Christmas movie. Lincoln was all about wanting to keep family tradition in a Loud House Christmas, but this time around he was willing to ditch tradition for Xander's Halloween party. He learned in the first movie how change isn't always a bad thing and it can be good for everyone, so this could technically qualify as character continuity even though Lincoln's sudden change in attitude was brought on by some kid with whom he was trying to win favor. His sisters and their attitudes towards family tradition in this movie, however, are the exact opposite from what they were before. They were okay with breaking tradition and changing things up for Christmas, but this time they got annoyed with Lincoln for ditching them on the night of their yearly Halloween Spooktacular. Upon hearing the sudden change of plans, they started acting the same way Lincoln did in the first movie, all whiny and pissed off. So this would actually be a downgrade from their characters compared to their brother. They weren't getting mad about a change in Christmas plans, but a change in Halloween plans is where they were going to draw the line? I seriously don't get that. Then again, their collective annoyance with Lincoln ditching them pales in comparison to other ridiculous character moments. In a way, Rita played a role in the soon-to-be disaster that would later befall her family's house. She had her kids taste testing candy for Halloween, which doesn't make sense considering it's the same pre-wrapped stuff you would normally buy at the store. She made it sound as if she was personally responsible for making the candy from scratch. Anyway, because her kids neglected to take care of their teeth, they all get cavities as a result, and Rita rightfully blames herself. I know her kids admit they weren't keeping up with their own dental hygiene, but their mom was the one bringing the candy into the house. As a former dental assistant, that wasn't exactly smart thinking on her part. So instead of handing out candy to all the kids coming to see their Spooktacular, she decides to hand out toothbrushes. Not to say she was going to get what she deserved later on, but you could pretty much tell what was going to happen next. All the trick-or-treaters rage about not getting candy and start complaining on social media. While Rita sends her wolfified husband to get candy, everyone at Xander's party sees all the complaints online. Lincoln, trying to rebuild his dwindling popularity at the party, suggests they all go and teach that house a lesson. What's interesting is nobody at the party tells Lincoln what house was giving away toothbrushes, and Lincoln never finds out the house in question was actually his until he sees what house everyone was going to vandalize. This is where I take issue with the way Lincoln's family jumped all over him when they found a video of him suggesting they go after the people responsible for the toothbrushes. He's never given the chance to properly explain how he didn't know the toothbrush house was actually his house until the very last second. His family firmly believed he knew his house was being targeted and purposely planned the attack anyway. Even the way Lincoln mentions what he had done to his family while he's at the junkyard makes you believe he was in fact intentionally planning to attack his own house, even though that was never the case. At the same time, he's not exactly innocent either. He was still hesitant on wanting to stop the attack since he was worried about falling out of favor with Xander. In fact, pardon the pun, he was egging Xander on to get closer to the house just so he could get attacked by the Louds. I do give Lincoln some props for at least trying to work as a double agent so he could help his family fend off Xander and his followers while still trying to stay on Xander's good side, but he still came off as an antagonist. He was still very much involved in the attack and worked harder to maintain his friendship with Xander more than he did to help his family drive away all those kids. Now, before I talk about Xander, I first have to bring up another detriment to the movie, which would be the pacing. The overall pacing to the movie feels incredibly dragged out with lots of padding to fill time. That's always been one of the problems to the live-action universe. Because the movie and TV series are not animated, they don't have the luxury of speeding up the action like any regular episode of the cartoon. What could normally be achieved in a 22-minute animated special took about 68 minutes, with the story being stretched out when it objectively didn't have to. While I can understand the comedic reasoning as to why certain scenes were placed in the movie, they undoubtedly come off as unnecessarily longer than they have to be. Like, did we really need to have the camera moving around to show all the kids getting their teeth worked on at the dentist? That could have been done in a single 3 to 5 second scene in the animated series, and you would have the same fallout in a shorter amount of time. This kind of padding is especially noticeable during the ambush at the Loud House. It felt like it dragged on to the point where the wackiness was becoming too much, and it was rather perplexing at times. For example, Luann was outside operating her giant Frankenstein coconuts puppet in plain view of everyone, and yet she and Lisa's giant pumpkin are rather conveniently never hit by the mob. Or at least no one plans to go after the pumpkin until someone mentions it a few minutes later. Had this entire sequence been animated, it wouldn't have looked so ridiculous. Imagine if the sequence for You Got Tricked was made using human actors. It definitely wouldn't hit the same. However, I would have been willing to excuse the long, drawn-out showdown had there been a few revisions. The main conflict could have reached its climax during the showdown at the Loud House. The entire sequence could have been rewritten to have Lincoln confessing to what he had done after his family finds the video of him convincing those kids to vandalize their home. His family calls him out on what he did, he apologizes and promises to put things right, and then helps his family fight off the other kids, with Xander being made to look stupid in the end. He could have gotten captured on video and become a laughingstock on the internet. The fallout could show Lincoln and Clyde making amends by cleaning up the entire mess themselves, and then telling Xander they don't care about trying to be his friend anymore. Oh yeah, and maybe have the dad return to the house with candy and then be told he freaked himself out for nothing. Having Xander steal Lisa's giant pumpkin and thus dragging out the conflict to the junkyard with even more insane fighting made the movie longer than it should have been. I know there was a reason for this because it tied into the Lynn Sr. werewolf plot, and Xander would eventually get humiliated on social media thanks to Lisa's pumpkin falling from the junkyard crusher claw and splattering all over him. Still, it's hard to argue that the story needed to go to the junkyard when there was easily enough material to bring the main conflict to a close at the Loud House. With enough rewrites, you could have shaved off a good 10 or 15 minutes and you could have had the same exact ending at the Loud House instead of the junkyard. In terms of overall runtime, this would have been a perfect idea. But no, much like the Christmas movie, the story was dragged out unnecessarily. But if you thought the story and pacing were bad enough, forget it. The biggest negative this movie has to offer is the primary antagonist, and his name is Xander. He's basically the live-action version of Chandler, or at least in some ways he displays similar mannerisms. He's the popular new kid at school who throws the best parties and has a large social media following as an influencer. I'm just going to say it. This kid is a asshole. I might even go so far as to say that he's actually worse than Chandler. The way he conducts himself in this movie is extremely agitating, even more so when Lincoln tries to be his friend. His performance at the beginning of the movie was just him being the typical middle schooler who thinks he's the coolest guy ever and everyone likes him because of his big-time social media status. It's only after he agrees to lead the attack on the Loud House is where my tolerance for his character went south very, very fast. Now, in fairness, he and those other kids wanting to egg and toilet paper a house on Halloween as a form of revenge or prank is not exactly that far out of left field. That's something you would expect kids of his age to do, especially if it's done as a way of proving you're cool to your friends. However, I'm not so much mad about him assaulting the Loud House per se. I'm more pissed off about why he felt the need to do it. Completely disregarding Lincoln's suggestion to vandalize the house for giving out toothbrushes, Xander's motivation for doing what he did was both very petty and nonsensical. He was throwing a fit at the beginning of the movie about going to the dentist, and hearing about a house handing out toothbrushes to trick-or-treaters prompted him to whine like a child. Why is everyone pushing dental care? I'm so sick of dental care! Like, dude, shut the f up. It's like if you weren't paying attention, you'd think the goddamn toothbrush fiasco happened to him. It's even more aggravating when you realize how everyone at his party blindly joined him in his anger about this misdeed and simply followed along with his plan to vandalize the house in question. Either these kids can't think for themselves, or they were trying to be buddy-buddy with Mr. Social Media by any means necessary. Try to remember how none of these kids at his party were trick-or-treating since they were all too cool for little kid stuff like that, and yet they were acting as if they were personally inconvenienced by the Loud family. They were seriously acting as if they were the ones who got screwed out of getting Halloween candy. It's one thing if the actual trick-or-treaters were planning revenge on the Louds, but as far as I could tell, none of those little kids who attended the family Spooktacular came back to vandalize their house. If Xander and his friends were the ones trick-or-treating and got toothbrushes, them going after the Louds would be more justified from their perspective. But no, Xander still wanted to extract revenge on people who posed no problem to him at all and were never going to. He took it one 100% on himself to go after the Loud House for something that had nothing to do with him whatsoever, and there was no limit to how far he was willing to go. Throwing eggs and toilet paper are one thing, but attempting to break into Lincoln's house and later steal Lisa's giant pumpkin was going too far. Yes, Lincoln said the toothbrush house needed to be taught a lesson, but I don't think he meant destroying it from the inside and crushing a large-scale pumpkin at the junkyard. Seriously, causing an insane amount of damage to the outside of someone's house, stealing someone else's property with the intent to destroy it, and willing to attack a bunch of girls as a way of teaching them a lesson because they were handing out a bunch of toothbrushes? Like I said, this kid is a asshole. But on the plus side, it was nice seeing him turn into a little crybaby when Lisa's giant pumpkin splattered all over him. He gets his comeuppance by getting embarrassed on a global scale, and Lincoln learns that trying to look cool for a guy like him wasn't worth it. Thanks to his dad getting some candy, the Louds bring back all the trick-or-treaters they drove away, and everything and everyone ends the movie on a happy note. It took longer than necessary to get to that happy note, but hey, a happy ending is a happy ending, so there you go. Overall, I think it's safe to say this live-action movie sucks in the long run. As much as I like the improvements made from the first movie and TV series when it comes to the acting and how more of the main and recurring characters had more screen time, there are more bad things that overshadow whatever good things the movie had to offer. Infuriating characters with stupid motivations, a story that needed revisions, excess padding that made the plot drag on, and character portrayals that made no sense. Would I say the movie still almost kinda works like I said in my review of the Christmas movie? A part of me says yes, but another part of me leans towards no. Given what the story was about and seeing the many cartoony antics performed by the characters, this movie still feels like something the animated series would do. Be that as it may, and I don't know if I'm going to be in the minority on this, but this movie was actually a step down from A Loud House Christmas. Visually speaking, it still beats the first movie by a long shot. However, in terms of writing for the story and some of the characters, it easily had the advantage of being better and shorter, but failed to make any sort of rewrites to the script. That's what prevents the sequel from being on the same level as the original. When I went back and rewatched the Christmas movie, I realized how there weren't as many opportunities to cut scenes from the final product as there were for the sequel. As I said, this Halloween movie could have easily cut out anywhere between 10 and 15 minutes of footage, and you would still have the same story, but with a shorter runtime. Had this film made the corrections I pointed out, and factoring in all my positives, I could have easily placed this on the same level as the original film, maybe even a bit higher. Unfortunately, despite all the positives, including main and recurring characters getting more screen time and some enjoyable music and dance numbers, it's the negatives like Xander and the story that knock it down a peg. So I would say if you're a fan of the animated series and care very little for the live action version, I would recommend just sticking to Tricked and maybe Great Lakes Freakout. This movie could never hold a candle to either of those two specials. The only other thing left to say would be this could very well be the final installment of the live action universe, at least at the time of this video being released. The movie was made prior to the production of the second season of the TV series, but filming for the series was suspended after the Hollywood writer's strike began. Even though the strike was settled the day before the film dropped on Nickelodeon and Paramount+, it's unclear whether the TV series will resume production. If I'm being honest, I'd rather see this film as the live-action series finale and simply end the story here. Seeing how time in our world doesn't stand still, there are some things that will hinder production going forward when or if they continue to make more episodes or seasons. For instance, Lincoln's voice matured during this film's production, just like Clyde's, therefore ruining the illusion of them being preteens with preteen voices as they are normally portrayed in the animated series. Plus, we have to acknowledge the fact many of these child actors are not getting any younger. Even though you sometimes have to suspend disbelief when watching a work of fiction, you can only have a preteen actress portray a 5-year-old character like Lisa for so long until it starts to look ridiculous. Maybe I'm overthinking too much on things like that, and maybe they can pull it off. But as for me, the live-action version of the show can only go so far. In my opinion, I think it reached its peak with this movie, but we'll just have to see where things go from here. With that said, I give A Really Haunted Loud House 2 stars out of 5. Well folks, that concludes my review of A Really Haunted Loud House. Now that you know what I thought about the movie, I just gotta ask, what did you guys think of it? Sound off in the comments below, and be sure to click that subscribe button for more Loud House related content. That's going to do it for me. I'll catch you guys for the next video, but until then, this is SteamTeamRedubUK, CC Trainor-Ling, signing off. Happy Halloween! Yes, anyway, peace out, home slices.